This is the Nissan X-Trail, and that's the Nissan Qashqai. If those names sound a bit strange to you, you might know them as the Rogue and the Rogue Sport. But which of these two is the right SUV for you? I'm AJ, you're watching Autogefühl, and let's dive right in. With this, the bigger brother of the two, the X-Trail. Up front, the design to me is a little bit more traditional Nissan. To me, it looks like the car is wearing a tuxedo with the nice black lapel and the bow tie right here in the middle. I also like these split LED headlamps, and there's some cool vents here to channel the air around the front bumper. A little bit more traditional, dare I say, as compared to its younger brother, the Qashqai, which is a lot more youthful, a lot more futuristic, and perhaps this front design is a little bit inspired by one of its Korean competitors, if you know what I mean. Still a nice large badge at the front, and very edgy looking split headlamps and more air vents lower down in the bumper. While the two cars are roughly the same width, the X-Trail is evidently longer at about 4.7 meters or 184 inches. It's also the taller one of the two and the heavier, about 1,900 kilos as compared to 1,600, 1,700 kilos in the Qashqai. Here in the N-Connecta trim, you get these really lovely 19-inch rims with this machined finish, giving it that dual tone color. I also like the chrome on the roofline and the roof rail itself. A nice sharp design line here for the shoulder, which fades away to the front door. And again, a more upright and tall stance, making it a pretty handsome looking SUV. The more compact Qashqai is 4.4 meters long or about 174 inches. Also here in the N-Connecta trim, you get very funky, sharp blade-like design on these 18-inch rims. I also like these ridges here. Quite busy though, but on the side profile, it's a very simple, neat shoulder line. It's a rising line, and I also like the floating roof effect with this black dual-tone paint scheme. And also this dark plastic shroud for the tail lamps also gives the Qashqai a lot more drama and presence. So, among the two of them, which one is your favorite? Put it down in the comments below. The back of the Qashqai, or the Rogue Sport, is again very youthful. I love this clear lens with that dash of silver right in the middle of the tail lights. Also the LED lights are so sharp. Clean, crisp lines here. Chrome for the lower part of the bumper. So again, very youthful as compared to the X-Trail or the Rogue, which is a little bit more traditional, a bit more curved and bulbous. And also, so many badges: Nissan, X-Trail, E-Force, E-Power. What do those mean? We'll cover that in a few minutes. Check out the turning indicator lights. The Qashqai has nice LED, and the X-Trail has just a halogen bulb. And here are the turning indicators at the front. Here is the key fob. You have keyless entry. The door opens really nice and wide. Let's give it a quick sound check. Pretty solid, no shimmies, no shakes on the hinges here, so pretty sturdy. Nice soft touch materials on the top, also cushioned armrest. The door panel is a little bit on the firm side, but in general, I would say it's pretty good. You also get different seat options, starting off with fabric seats. You also get nice leatherette seats as well, but also you can get the full animal skin leather seats here with automatic control. Let's step inside. Again, with the SUV style, you get a slightly taller ride height, so you don't have to bend down, a taller body, so you don't have to duck your head. But it's not much of a climb either. Steering wheel is nice and compact, so it feels very easy to drive, very compact in terms of its feel, but a nice, wide, expansive dashboard. So, a lot to talk about this. Why don't you come inside and we'll take a closer look. Nice materials on the dashboard. Looks pretty well screwed together. Nice detailing over here. Glove box is damped, however, it's not that large and there's no light on the inside. Over here we have an actual climate control unit with buttons and knobs to change the temperature. This particular version has 3 zones, so 2 in the front and 1 in the back. You also get seat heating and even steering wheel heating, which is lovely on cold days. A couple USB ports, C and A, and a 12 volt, and an inductive phone charger, so you can charge all the appliances in your house with this right there. EV buttons, So we'll talk a little bit more about this once we're on the road. And also look at the gear lever selector. It's like a little piece of, it's like a soap bar, you know, you got to slide it back and forth. Not so sure how I feel about that. The cup holders as well, there's nothing adaptive about them and they're not that deep. So keeping bottles here, well, keep them at your own risk. Drive mode selector. Now this being the E-Force, you have different modes like snow, off-road, eco, and sport. We'll test them out later on. But I really like this down here. Look at this. You have so much space. You can keep additional items here. And I think that's one of the benefits of having this kind of a electronic gear selector here. Remember, E-Power. A split armrest here in the middle with even more storage area. So yeah, very practical. The base model starts with an 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system, but this is the more advanced top-of-the-range version. You also get nice shortcut buttons, for example, volume knob, and I love this camera shortcut. Whenever I'm parking, I always use the parking cameras. Speaking of which, the resolution is actually pretty bad. I'm a little bit disappointed with how pixelated the system is, so definitely needs an upgrade pretty soon. But other than that, you also have wireless Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, so it's really easy to just use your phone and then you have your navigation, your Spotify, so it works really well. Although you can see that the Android Auto ends about here, these menus remain there and you can also see the bezel quite evidently, but it's still a very large and very bright screen. There's also some other basic connected apps like weather. The steering wheel is super simple, but in that simplicity, it's so easy to use. There's actual buttons and rollers and rockers and actual buttons, so no haptic, capacitive kind of touch systems here. So really nice, pretty thin steering wheel actually. In the top of the range, you also get a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster, which, as you can imagine, has different options for the screen and to display different kinds of features and different kinds of information like your music, although you cannot get your Android Auto navigation here on the screen. It's only the native navigation that can be displayed here. There's also a head-up display. Let's take a look at the back seat of the Rogue. Getting inside is pretty easy thanks to this large door and large opening. The materials on the side of the door panel is also pretty good. This is a little bit hard, yes, but this is soft. So is this. You also have this nice textured inlay, and I love this sunshade that's integrated. Really cool. But there's so many little details that I really like. For example, this clip to hold the seat belts in, right over there. The ISOFIX points are also uncovered, so it's really easy to identify and clip. You have a pouch here on the seat, and this bench can be slid forwards or backwards in these two 60/40 sections. You can also change the angle of recline of this back seat. So again, I'm 5'8", or about 1.7 meters. If I put the seat all the way back, and this is again my driving position, or roughly how I would have it, plenty of knee room, plenty of space for my feet, plenty of headroom as well. In fact, the seat base is really flat, even here in the middle. There's no bulge on the outside, so 3 adults could sit pretty comfortably here. There's not much of a transmission tunnel, so you have plenty of space for your feet. Optionally, you can get seat heating for the rear passengers, more charging, and a separate climate control unit. So come on, you really can't complain. Just look at that, plenty of practicality. All right, let's take a look at the trunk of the X-Trail or the Rogue. In fact, the Rogue can be even had as a 7-seater option. Definitely, this is the larger trunk of the two at 575 liters. If I were to quickly take a look, it's about 36 inches or about 91 centimeters in terms of length. Also very rectangular, and in this height you have about 79 centimeters or about 31.5 inches. Now the floor can be adjusted, although this doesn't help much because you have the battery and some of the other kit below this. You could move this floor down like such, but then I don't really know how much useful space you're getting out of there. Of course you can remove this parcel shelf, but in order to put the seats down you have to go to the front. But yeah, now with the seats down, and if you don't have a third row, there's a lot of space to haul a lot of cargo. As you can see, the key fobs are identical. In either case, keyless entry, so it doesn't really matter. The door is a little bit shorter. Let's check the door closing sound. Not too bad. I heard a bit of a squeak from one of the rubber seals, but other than that, it's pretty good. This didn't shimmy or shake. But in general, I'm quite happy because the materials are really nice, just like we saw in the Rogue. Even a soft plush padded armrest. The seats in this case are fabric. So remember, the base starts with fabric, but you can also get synthetic leather and quilted leather. But I really like the colors on this seat. This also is not an automatic adjusting seat. You see these are manual controls to adjust it, although the lumbar support is automatic. Let's get inside. Remember, this is a little bit shorter than the Qashqai, and this already shows because I have to duck my head, or shorter than the X-Trail rather. But getting inside still feels like you're sitting a little bit higher. You still have a nice visibility out front. And the dash is, again, very familiar, but there's some other key differences. So why don't you come inside and we'll take a closer look. So the interior is very similar between the two SUVs, but here in the smaller Qashqai, again, that youthful, modern, futuristic design continues. You get ambient lighting, even though there's just a little sliver of it inside here. Glove box is damped, but at the same time, not, and it doesn't have any lights. Over here, a very similar climate control unit, which is great because you have physical buttons and knobs, steering wheel heating, seat heating, but only 2 zones here for the front, which I think is pretty good. Down here, inductive phone charger, although you don't have any USB ports here like you get in the X-Trail, so that's a bit of a miss. You can, of course, just use the 12-volt power socket to have a couple slots there. Similar controls for the e-pedal and EV and the similar gear selector over here. Drive mode selector is much more simplified with just a small little toggle switch. Cup holders, again, missing any kind of adaptive clamps or clips, but some points for having this pretty cool center armrest because you can open just one section of it and you have a little shelf here where you can open up the whole thing, and then now you have more space underneath, and as you can see, a couple USB-C ports over there. Similarly, you start off with an 8-inch infotainment system, but the top end comes with this 9-inch infotainment system, although this already feels like it's one generation newer with Google Maps. It's also a lot more slick. You can see that here with the way the animations are laid out. Similar buttons down here, which are useful. The camera does have this nicer looking 3D animation, but the quality of the camera itself, I don't really see much of an improvement. You see how it clips, and then just the resolution is still, I would say, not that great. Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, wireless in this case. So let's take a look. In this particular version, we have now the Apple CarPlay, but I think it's the same as we saw in the Rogue. It doesn't occupy the entire screen. You still are left with this menu, which is fine. And there's some, the settings buttons have been moved lower down, so the icons are down here. But still, I would say it's a pretty large display and very easy to use. There are some native navigation and native connected systems, including Google Assistant, but also things like Amazon Alexa. Identical steering wheel, so really easy to use, and the same layout of the buttons. And again, no kind of paddle shifters either. And again, we'll talk about the drivetrain and the systems later on. Same story once again with the digital instruments, but here as well, because of the slightly more modern operating system, you see that the navigation, even the voice assistant, is a little bit better here in this new Qashqai, but only the native map navigation shows, but some other useful information here as well. No head-up display though. The back of the Qashqai, as expected, is a little bit more compact as compared to the X-Trail. Materials on the door panel are still pretty nice though, with soft touch over here. The opening is reasonably adequate, and you do have ISOFIX child seats mounting points on the outside 2 seats, although these are the caps that pop out completely and you're going to end up losing them. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that the seat bench itself cannot be moved or adjusted. It doesn't slide forward or backwards like we saw in the X-Trail. And while you can fold the seats they don't have different levels for recline, so you're stuck with this one angle. Furthermore, these seats are really nice and contoured, but as you can tell, there's a big bulge here, which means that it's really uncomfortable if there's 3 people sitting side by side, because this is going to be going up somebody's spine. So these contours are kind of unfortunately restricting it to only, having 2 passengers here who can sit very comfortably. But the bench in the middle is actually not too bad. So yeah, as expected, not as comfortable, not as spacious as the X-Trail. No separate climate zone, although I do have my own vents and I do have my own charging ports. And finally, an armrest with really shallow cup holders. I don't think you can put much of anything over here, but it's nice to maybe just, if you want to hold on to it while you're sitting, maybe that could work. The seat is set to my driving position. I'm 5'8" or 1.7 meters. Have enough knee room. I can slide my feet forward, and I have adequate headroom. Let's take a look at the trunk of the Qashqai or the Rogue Sport. Here in the e-Power, it's 455 liters. The length is 85 centimeters or 33.5 inches. It's not that bad, to be honest. If I were to get the parcel shelf out of the way and hand it to Michelle over there, the height is, quite limited, I think. This is only about 28 inches or about 72, 73 centimeters. But I do really like these floorboards. Just like in the Rogue, you can, for example, put it this way, and then you have a place to separate some of your groceries. You have hooks, which the Rogue, the X-Trail, doesn't have. So very useful for grocery shopping, so that your things don't fly around. You can also just move these two all the way down, and then you have more volume. And of course, the seats can be tumbled down. And then you have, well, in this configuration, not a flat loading floor, but if we were to bring this back up, then you can see here that then yes, indeed, you have a very flat and long loading area. Now here's where things get interesting. Both of these SUVs get the same powertrain, the Nissan e-Power. Well, what does that mean? Well, clearly it's an electrified hybrid system. But no, it's not a plug-in hybrid, it's a self-charging strong hybrid. But unlike other hybrid systems, this is in series connection with the electric motor. What that means is the engine doesn't drive the wheels at all. Instead, it acts purely as an onboard generator, which charges the battery, which then powers the electric motor to drive the wheels. This is a 1.5 liter 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine, and with the small lithium-ion battery, there's an electric motor on the front axle here in the Rogue Sport or the Qashqai, and it drives the front wheels. The max output of this system is 190 PS. On the other hand, while the Rogue or the X-Trail has the same 1.5 and a electric motor in series driving the front wheels, this also has, remember, the E-Force. And as you can probably guess, that means it's 4-wheel drive with another electric motor on the rear axle. Therefore, one electric motor for the front wheels, one electric motor for the rear wheels, and the combined output here is 213 metric horsepower or PS. So really interesting system, because from behind the wheel, effectively, this should be driving like an electric car. You will never have an engagement or a coupling with the engine and the front wheels. And therefore, how does that translate into driving dynamics? And is this the hybrid that's a better and more efficient system? Let's find out. So, let's drive the Qashqai. Now the e-Power, it's an electric motor only, and the engine is there just to charge the battery. It's the electric motor which is driving the front wheels. How does that feel? Well, it feels like I'm driving an electric car. There's instant torque, so really easy to get off the line. In fact, if I go to sport mode, well, not much really changes, but if I put my foot down, it gives you a lot more response. You do hear the engine, but again, it's this there to provide that extra voltage to charge the battery to give you that full 190 PS max output from the electric motor drive. I think though, it's more, it's more at home when you have it in the standard mode. The steering doesn't really change too much either, so the feedback is okay from the steering wheel. In the sport mode, it does get a little bit heavier, but the suspension is doing a really nice job. It's smoothing out all the bumps on this uneven surface on this road. It's not letting any of the sharpness filter in, any of the bumps and jumps. It's keeping the car fairly planted. And yeah, it's a really interesting way to experience driving a hybrid car. You know, unlike, let's say, the Toyota eCVT that we recently tested, the engine is not connected to the wheels, and therefore you don't feel any change between the engine driving the wheels or the electric motor driving the wheels. You don't have that coupling and decoupling sensation. As far as you're concerned, you always just have that same smooth, linear power delivery from the electric motor. And in this way, because the engine is just as a generator, the engine is just designed to be as efficient as possible. It even runs a variable compression ratio, so it can, usually this is achieved by changing the lift and duration of the valves, using a different cam profile, so the engine can be revving at a different RPM as and when it needs to, charge the battery depending on the load. So it can be doing its own thing, and it's therefore more isolated from your driving. Does that mean that the mileage is phenomenally different? Well, the truth is, not necessarily. In fact, this is giving us about 6.6 liters for 100 kilometers when we were out on the highway. In sport mode, when we push it a little bit, it's a little bit more, around 8. But yeah, for 220 kilometers, 6.6 is okay. It's not necessarily something to write home about. So it's achieving this hybrid kind of powertrain with a different approach. But yeah, on the country roads, not a hot hatch, but it can get the job done reasonably well if you're in a bit of a hurry. All right, so now let's get out onto the Autobahn and see how the Qashqai fares out on the open road. Yeah, high-speed corners here on the on-ramp, handled that pretty well. Merging onto traffic, that instant torque is really helping me merge quite well, although the first thing I already want to talk about is quite evident, and that's the engine sound. Now, we talked about how nice it is just to have the electric motor driving the wheels and the engine doing its own thing, but the downside of that is it tends to drone. It has a very loud 3-cylinder thrum, and you hear it not necessarily when you expect to, but also when you don't expect to hear it. Like if you're standing at a traffic light and it needs to charge the battery, then you'll just hear it go up and start droning. And it doesn't sound that nice. But other than that, there's a lot of nice things to talk about. So let's start with, for example, the adaptive cruise control system. So there's a button here, and now it's activated. I set the speed to the speed limit, and now the system is maintaining the speed. It's using the radar to check the distance with the car in front. It's also keeping me in the middle of the lane. It's a very nice and gentle intervention. It's got cameras to see the traffic speed limits, the traffic signs. And then it will also adjust my speed limit set on the cruise control to the new speed limit. So it's really intelligent that way. Again, not a system that we've never seen. It's quite common in this segment, in fact, even segments below. But it's nice to see that this system works well and is fairly confident. The engine noise, yes, when it tends to drone is a bit intrusive. Wind noise, on the other hand, is not too bad. Road noise is also not too bad. The seats are also really nice and comfortable, although I would say it can be a little bit on the narrower side if you're somebody with a slightly wider build. So take a nice long test drive to see how you fit in the specific seats that you like. Visibility is pretty good, although I must say the A-pillar is a little bit far out since the edge of the dashboard is really far in front of me. So there's a little bit of a blind spot when I'm merging onto traffic or taking when I'm at a crossroad and have to take a turn. The A-pillars can sometimes be a little bit of a hindrance in terms of visibility. But visibility out the side, out the back, and in general, it's really, really good. Let's take a look at the mileage that we're getting. So 6.6 liters for 236 kilometers, about 4 hours of driving. It's not great. I mean, with all this fancy hybrid technology, you would expect it to be a little bit better. That's not necessarily the case. This engine is a little bit new, so sure, there can be a better run-in period to have higher numbers. So the benefit of this kind of a hybrid system as compared to an ECVT like we see in Toyotas is purely the convenience and the smoothness of the drivetrain and the tractability. You don't notice the engine coupling and decoupling from the wheels or a transmission changing the gears. It's a single-speed electric motor. So that's the primary benefit. In terms of the mileage outright, I don't really see it doing much of a difference. But nevertheless, out on the highway, stable, composed, planted, comfortable, and confidence-inspiring with these assistance systems. The Qashqai is definitely an urban crossover. So in the city is where it thrives. This is its natural habitat. Light steering, compact dimensions, and a smooth ride and a very comfortable suspension setup means that, for example, on these European village cobblestones, my brain isn't rattling inside my skull. And yeah, the A-pillar, like I said, is a bit of a hindrance, and the fact that the camera, first of all, doesn't turn on at speeds like this. You need to be really slow. The resolution is not so great, means that it's not the best. But just inherently in the size of this vehicle, it's very easy to drive. And with this hybrid system, another major benefit is the fact that you get better mileage in the city because it can drive in EV mode a lot more. Speaking of which, you have the e-pedal button here where you can use that almost like, you know, in electric cars you get the one pedal where the minute you let go of the accelerator pedal, a lot of regen braking happens, so you can pretty much just use that one pedal to modulate your speed. So that's what this button does. And you can also just drive in pure EV mode if there's enough battery. You won't get much range, but if you're in the middle of a city or you're in a climate control or like a city zone where you cannot bring in a petrol or a diesel car and you have to drive in electric, or you want to be silent and sneak in back home, then you can use that button to jump into EV mode. Of course, it only works if there's sufficient battery charge left to allow you to do that. So overall, it's a really interesting kind of a powertrain. I like the kind of engineering and the thought that's gone behind it. It does make a difference in certain critical ways, but in terms of outright mileage, I didn't see much of a benefit with this kind of a system. But how does that compare now with the X-Trail, with the Rogue, with the bigger SUV? How's that there? Let's jump in and find out. Now the Rogue, or the X-Trail, the bigger brother, significantly more weight, almost 2 tons, but about the same width, a little bit taller, longer wheelbase, so yes, larger. How does it fare? Actually, let's first go to sport mode. And here as well, between these different modes, there's very little difference. You know, it's still, the steering feels the same. It's not a very sporty steering feel. It's still very mild. It's mostly the accelerator response mapping where more energy is being pushed into the electric motor to give me much more power. And sure, the rear axle motor can also be more active to provide me that little bit of rear power and torque to give that little bit of yaw. But in any case, this is not designed to be a sporty car. It's designed to be a nice, comfortable cruiser. And sure, you can hustle it in the sport mode on these country roads. It's fun enough, but it's not necessarily going to be very engaging. So that being said, let's go back to standard mode and then let's compare it with the Qashqai. The engine already seems a lot quieter, even though it is exactly the same 1.5 turbo 3-cylinder petrol. Yes, it's a bit strange that when you're stopped at a red light or you're slowing down, you hear the engine rev up and fire up and start droning. But there's definitely more sound insulation here in the X-Trail. And even though this is a larger SUV, actually on these roads, it doesn't feel any more cumbersome to drive. It It dives into the corners really nice. The steering is very precise, so I'm definitely not feeling like I'm missing much. A little bit more body roll for sure, but it was not like the Qashqai was necessarily very athletic in its handling, and so I don't feel like I'm missing out too much. But yeah, suspension is also doing a really nice job. So both of these SUVs have really good suspension, I would say. Very nice at rounding off the edges, keeping you isolated from the bumps on the road. Let's make a 3-point turn. Let's check the turning circle. Yeah, not too bad. 360 view here. Yeah, not the best. Camera quality, again, not the greatest. But definitely quite maneuverable as well. So it's not necessarily going to feel gargantuan. And that electric motor system really gives you that instant lunging ability. And with the dual axle motor setup, so the twin motor, you're getting a combined output of 213 PS. So it is more than the Qashqai. So it doesn't feel underpowered either, even though this is bigger and heavier. The additional motor definitely makes a big difference. So I would say, if you're test driving these two vehicles as I am, check for the four-wheel drive version of the X-Trail, just to see if that really is needed to give you the extra torque from the rear axle, or if just the same front 190 PS e-Power front-wheel drive system would be sufficient for this heavier weight. But now I'm curious, how does this behave out on the highway? Okay. Around this corner, down the ramp, merging onto the Autobahn. Yeah, already the engine is not as drony as before. Instant torque, 2 electric motors, was able to merge on with no problems whatsoever. So definitely the X-Trail, or the Rogue, the bigger brother, has more sound deadening, and the dual motor setup does help compensate for the fact that this is heavier, so more power output as well. Let's turn on the adaptive cruise control, the advanced driver assistance systems. Similar setup here, right? So you have the lane keeping assist, you have the traffic sign recognition, adaptive cruise control, doing all of those things to, help you on your long drives. Although, I must say, because I drove 2 hours, and this car seemed like it wasn't as good as capturing the distance with the car in front of me. I found many times where I was like, oh, it needs to slow down, and it doesn't. It keeps accelerating and plowing towards the car in the front, and then suddenly it's like, oh no, there's a car, and then it just slams the brake too hard. And so it's a little bit abrupt, it's not as smooth. So I think it's not the throw or the reach of this adaptive cruise control isn't far enough, and it's not refined enough to be able to have that maintained a lot more comfortably and gradually. It's more binary. It's accelerate, brake, but it's not the end of the world, and you can always just coax it further or slow it down. You can just deactivate it with this button here to cancel it, and then reset it with a simple click. So you have more control over it. You might need to intervene a little bit more to maintain that smoothness, but otherwise definitely feels a bit quieter of the two. Not necessarily just the engine, but in general. Like you see right now, it's still accelerating, and now it's hitting the brake. It's a little bit more abrupt. It should have noticed that, I would say, earlier. But the mileage is the other thing, which is still a little bit of an issue with this X-Trail. This system sounds good, and I definitely prefer this because you're driving an electric car, just carrying around a generator. So it's definitely the right kind of strong hybrid if you don't want a plug-in hybrid. But this is saying 8.4 liters for 100 kilometers, and I haven't been pushing the car too much. This is a combined cycle of around 300 kilometers of driving around in the city, taking it to work, coming here on the Autobahn for a couple hours, a little bit of spirited driving, a little bit of driving in the hills, but I would say I didn't push this. This is how I would drive if I were living with the SUV. And 8.4 is definitely too much. I will also give it some flexibility because this is a brand new engine. It's just about 2,000 kilometers, so it hasn't finished its run-in period. So perhaps it gets a little bit better. But on the whole, this hybrid system means that yes, you have electric drive capabilities in the city. It is definitely giving you more torque, and the smoothness and the refinement is definitely fantastic, but not necessarily for the mileage. In general though, very comfortable, very planted, good visibility on the highway. These A-pillars don't block you so much because on the highway you don't really need them. But let's see how that fares when we're out in the city. So let's go into the e-pedal mode and pure EV mode. So now I'm driving completely electric, as this would be an electric car here in the city. And this EV pedal is so nice because, sure, I came to a complete stop. I had to use it now. But other than that, I never really have to take my foot off this one singular position. Sure, this does feel a little bit bigger, but this has a slightly taller seating position, and I also get a nice overview. This A-pillar is a little bit tricky. Like right now I need to take this left turn, I need to stop here, and now I need to kind of peer around the pillar a little bit. So I'm nitpicking. It's not bad. Suspension again is really good. I think both these SUVs have really nice suspension calibration, very smooth. Steering is really light. And being able to just zip around in electric mode in the city is also lovely. Sure, I will admit that the X-Trail feels a little bit larger as it is to drive here in the city as compared to the Qashqai. It's not because it's wider, but just because the sensation of space is more, and therefore I'm more aware of the size of the SUV. There is no rear axle steering or the such, but between these two, it's just a little bit more cumbersome. But in isolation, I don't think you would ever find this challenging to drive in the city. So let's turn off the e-pedal. And now the engine roars back, it's charging the battery. But yeah, definitely quieter than the Qashqai. All right, so overall, these two are a lot closer than I anticipated in terms of their driving sensation, their chassis and their handling. And this e-performance hybrid system is really unique. It's not unique to Nissan, it's just unique as a concept. It's not very often, but other manufacturers have also been doing this. It's not new. And like we see, the benefit is not necessarily better mileage, it's just a smooth driving experience because of that instant torque. So which one of the two? It's a tricky question. Why don't you tell me already which one you would pick, and I'll tell you now what I think as my final verdict. Choosing a winner between these two is really tricky because, first of all, while these are the current versions we get here in Germany, there's a 2025 model year of the Rogue that we don't have here yet. Similarly, this Qashqai is no longer available in the North American market. Then there's the price. This specific spec version here as our test car is 45,000 euros. This test car is about 50,500 euros. Purely going by the value for money and the practicality you get with the optional 7-seat version, I'm slightly more leaning towards the X-Trail, but I definitely like the way the Qashqai looks, and I like the younger and youthful interior and the tech that you get, and I can live with the droning engine. So overall, I think it comes down to, do you need 7 seats? Do you need more space? Or would you rather save a little bit of money? So let me know, what would be your pick? Put it down in the comments below. And while you're at it, why don't you check out some of these other videos of other competitors in this market and see if there's another option outside of these two that you should be looking at.